Hello everyone, back at it again in my little gray crawdad. Just launched the crawdad into a small clear water pond. It's a beautiful fall day, partly cloudy. Got clear water here, so I thought I'd start out with a jerkbait. That's a jackal re-range, kind of a natural minnow pattern. Thought it was a good place to start. Got my 610 medium X Pride and Shimano Corrado MGL 70. Makes an excellent hard jerkbait combo. Also great for soft jerkbaits like flukes if you use a light wire hook. But now it's properly fall. I mean, it's cool. You can see I've got fingerless fleece gloves on. Those are a lifesaver, by the way. Those are a Bass Pro Shops brand called White River. And they make these fleece gloves for fly fishermen, but I found they really work great for, bass fishermen too. Pretty much any kind of fishing. And I liked them so much I got two pairs. So if one gets wet or nasty or fish slime, I just switch them out, put on a different pair. But if you're careful and use the net to land fish, they'll last quite a while. So those fingerless fleece gloves, they let me fish down to probably high 30s air temperature. And if I switch to spinning gear, I can get a little bit lower than that, a few degrees lower. And then if I'm really feeling ambitious, I can switch to straight mono or fluoro and get a few more degrees before everything just starts to freeze up. But those fingerless fleece gloves, they let you feel everything. So I can feel when a fish bites. I can feel when I'm hitting that jerkbait. So none of the feel is diminished because I still have all the sensitivity of having my fingerprints right on that reel and right on that rod. Whereas some other gloves like neoprene gloves or like work gloves or something like that, you put those on, you just have no feeling at all. And I really don't like fishing with those heavier gloves if I have a choice at all. So these fingerless gloves are really just a lifesaver, and they're cheap too. All right, enough about gloves. The plan originally was to drive north and find some areas that were less windy, and I did, but I drove a little bit too far north, and I don't have a lot of wind. I've got a little bit of a ripple on the pond right now. I could use just a little bit more wind. The water is really clear, and the fish get a very good look at the baits, so just a little bit more wind helps a ton. The other thing that I didn't really think through is that the lows overnight were in the 20s, and the water temperature up here is, I would guess, high 30s. I mean, in another 20 days or so, this might be covered in ice. Probably not enough ice to stand on, but too much ice to fish open water. So I'm really kind of cutting it close to the end of the season for this part of the country. And the fish were slow. It took me a while to figure out, but they were buried in some offshore weeds, some deep weeds. And the only thing that I could get them to come out for was a chatterbait. I didn't know that when I just started fishing. And I was fishing this jerkbait. I tried a bunch of lures. But they wouldn't come out of the weeds for anything other than a chatterbait. And they wouldn't eat the chatterbait unless I had some wind, and the wind was pretty inconsistent. So that means I had to cycle through a bunch of baits, and eventually, I'll talk about this a little later, I had to go to a plan B and then a backup to the backup plan. This time of year, I like to carry a little ultralight rod. You can see it at the bottom of the crawdad, kind of at the bottom of the screen there. It's a 4'6" ultralight rod. And I have this one rigged up with a yellow and white tube. And I brought some worms along with me to tip that tube with a little piece of real trout worm, red worms. And if all else fails, if the wind dies, the bass won't bite, I can catch panfish and perch on that little combo and save an otherwise kind of slow trip. All right, I swapped out my jerkbait rod for a chatterbait rod. In this case, I'm throwing an older jackhammer. For whatever reason, I've got a few jackhammers that just seem to produce better than some of the newer ones even. I'm not really sure why, but I just keep fixing them up. I replace the skirt 2 or 3 times. Sometimes I sharpen the hook, swap out trailers as needed. Sometimes I'll go over the blade if it's a darker blade with a Sharpie. And I don't know if you noticed, but I was ripping that jackhammer, that chatterbait, out of the deep weeds. And that's what it takes to trigger these fish into eating. I mean, these fish are icy cold. The water's icy cold. Normally, you'd think they go after a jerkbait. I couldn't get anything going on the jerkbait. But once I swapped over to the chatterbait, they were all over it. Now, that's not a giant fish. He's even a little skinny. But I was happy to at least get one in the boat. Kick off the trip with a fish. It's always nice. Get the skunk out of the boat. And then the wind kind of died. You can see it's pretty much flat calm there. And I cycled through a bunch of lures. Jerkbaits, rattle traps, smaller jerkbaits. See, they've got almost no wind there. And I ended up pulling out that ultralight rod. It's a 4'6" Fluger President ultralight rod. So it's tiny. And I got this as part of a combo. I think it was a President reel and the rod for, I think, $50 or something like that. So if you do the math, say the reel was worth $50, you're getting the rod pretty much for free. I thought, what the heck, I'll just get the combo. And it's nice to have in the boat when you have conditions like this. You see the water's just flat calm. It's like a mirror. The only ripple is from me landing that perch. And a little ultralight rod this time of year can save a trip for me. Now, I did end up catching some more bass, but it was completely dependent on the wind blowing. So as soon as that wind starts blowing, I put the ultralight rod down, pick up the chatterbait rod, and I'm back in business for a couple casts, a couple fish. Wind dies, and then I'm back to the ultralight. So here I'm actually casting against the wind, which isn't my favorite with a chatterbait, but that's okay. The wind just started blowing, so I immediately swapped out of the ultralight rod back to the chatterbait rod. You see me every once in a while I pop it. I try to pop it out of the weeds, and as soon as I popped it out of the weeds, there's a fish on it. You know, oftentimes they track it for a little bit and they wait for it to do something different, change direction, change speed, change sound, change vibration, and then he was on it. Now, he's not a giant either, but I can't be too picky on this trip. Got a little bit more wind. I turn the crawdad around. I'm casting with the wind now. I can really make a bomber cast with this rod and reel too, and a 1/2 ounce chatterbait. It just flies effortlessly, and that helps too because the water's super clear. I can get that bait way away from the boat, and I have plenty of room to try to trigger these fish. Now, if I hadn't made a long cast, I probably would have run out of room to get that fish to eat. He followed it almost all the way to the boat, and then I popped it near the boat, and he was on it. But, you know, maybe he was 10 yards away from the boat. I mean, he was really close. There's a better look at the chatterbait. I'll put all the details about the chatterbait and the replacement skirt and the trailer. The trailer's a spunk shad in a newer color. It's called TW Bluegill, something like that. I think it really looks natural, and I thought it would be a good choice for a pond like this that it doesn't have like a big base of herring or shad or even golden shiners. The primary forage in here are perch and little bluegill. So I wanted something in that panfish color spectrum, and it doesn't have to be, I don't feel like, it doesn't have to be an exact match. Just something that looks kind of like a panfish is close enough for me. I got on a little run there because I had the wind, and then now look, I got no wind. So I'm back to running through different baits, playing with some things. This is a Megabass trick darter. It's the X80 trick darter. and I've never thrown one before, and I thought I'd give it a try. And I'm not as big of a fan of it as I hoped I would be. Now, I haven't fished it a ton. I fished it a little bit at a different lake a couple weekends ago. I fished it on this trip, and it's got a cup in the lip, which makes it a little finicky. If you hit it too hard or start reeling too hard or try to work it fast, it wants to blow out because of that cup on the lip. So you have to, I would say, baby it a little bit, at least until it gets going and dives down. The other thing that I've been doing is cranking it down first, like a crankbait, and then I start working it. Now, this isn't a giant bass at all. It's actually probably one of the smallest of the day. But I was happy that I could get something going on a bait with no wind. He's not going to win any prizes, but it was just like a inkling of trying to crack the code. The other thing I noticed is that the perch were following my baits in, including the megabass trick darter. Now, they weren't too keen on eating the trick darter like that little bass was, but they followed it right up to the boat, and then I can grab the ultralight, do the old bait and switch, and put a few more fish in the boat. If he'll settle down, I'll show him to you. There's that yellow and white tube with a little piece of worm, and there's that perch. I think the perch were actually in better condition in this pond than the bass. A lot of the bass were looking kind of skinny. The other thing that was interesting to me is that where I came from, southern New Hampshire, we have a drought going on. You know, I know in Florida and Georgia and the Carolinas, they got flooded, just terrible. But we haven't had really much rain at all. So we've had a drought while they got flooded, and I'm sure they'd rather trade places with us. But the drought hasn't been good here. And a lot of the ponds and lakes are low. Some a foot low, some 3 feet, some a lot more. In addition, we're having fall drawdowns. A lot of lakes, they drop the water in the winter to help control weeds and things like that. Anyway, when I got up here, no problem, no drought, pond's nice and high, and I thought it might be an excuse for the fish being a little skinny. But yeah, the water's nice and high. They should be eating well. And it could be they just don't have a lot of forage in here other than the perch and the sunfish, and those smaller bass, they need to get a certain size before they can choke down a 10-inch perch. The math just doesn't work otherwise. So you end up with a population of good-sized perch, kind of smaller bass, and there's got to be a few big ones in here, but I couldn't get them to go on this trip. You can see the weeds I'm fishing over. I know it kind of looks like clouds in the sky mirroring off the surface of the water there, but those are weeds underneath the surface of the water. Some clouds in there too, but if you look closely, you can see the tops of the weeds I'm fishing. It's like an underwater jungle down there. And again, the water's super clear, so I can see the fish. Of course, the fish can see me too, which can be problematic. Sometimes they'll turn away from the boat if they get a good look at me. But I can basically sight fish these perch once they follow the lures into the crawdad, or I just happen to run over a school of perch or something like that. I'll just drop the tube. Oh, I almost impaled myself on that jerkbait there. That's a Berkeley Stunner. I was fooling around with that jerkbait too. I like those jerkbaits. Getting a little off topic here, but I just changed the hooks out, and it's a slow sinking jerkbait, and it works well. All right, there's a view of the perch. That's a full-grown one right there. Also a nice view of my finger, all dirtied up from handling fish and worms. Trying to get a closer view of the perch, and I got my finger instead. That's all right. All right, you can see that I've completely lost the wind. It's getting a little bit darker. It's getting colder too. It was 43 degrees when I stopped fishing. So I'm just fooling around, fishing a few other baits. And this is a Damiki BTC 50. And I got a little bass on it. I was hoping this bait would be a shallow runner, like 1 to 2 feet. Seems to be more like 2 to 3, maybe 4 in my hands on my gear. It's not exactly what I was looking for, but I think it'll be great in the spring, maybe summer. It's a big bulbous bait. Should be high floating. And this bass liked what he saw. He's not a very big bass, but I appreciate him giving me a little feedback. And for the super shallow stuff, I'll use that Yozuri Wake, 3DS Wake, which is just an awesome shallow running bait. Tried a few casts with the jackhammer, but the fish weren't having any of it. So thank you all for watching. I really appreciate it. Just like all my other videos, I'll put all the gear in the video description so you can duplicate what I was doing out here today. Hopefully have some good success at your home lakes. I'll catch you on the next one. See ya!